Welcome to Project Command. I'm Captain Peter Eunice, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the who, what, when, where, and why of project communication. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, it really helps us if you like, subscribe, or share this episode or any episode that you found valuable with a friend or coworker who you think might appreciate it. At Project Command, we're committed to helping fire departments deliver better projects. And if you've got a question or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it either by email or in a future episode. So please help us spread the word and keep the mission moving forward. All right, now to the episode. All right, so first things first, the who. So you have your project going. And on the last episode, we talked a lot about how to get your project going. That's, that you got your charter document. That's the high level scope. You got your, requirements, which is like, what are the specific things that your project needs to capture or get done? You collected those requirements from all your stakeholders. You put that together into a good comprehensive scope. You took that scope, you broke it down into a great big giant to-do list, like all the little things you have to do in order to meet the elements of your scope. You took that to-do list that you broke down and you organized it, you sequenced it. What's got to come first? What's going to go in the middle? What's going to go at the end? You plugged those things in along your timeline, which was like, when does the project start? When does it end? And then you filled in all the little activities along the way, sequenced. And then you looked at, what are our dependencies? What is like this thing can't get done until this thing's been done, and so on and so forth. Then you looked for naturally occurring pauses in the sequence of your project, like where is the work going to stop and what can we do to prevent that? That's your lead and your lag. So you got your project up and running. Everything's good to go now. You've estimated your schedule. You've estimated your budget. Now you need to communicate, or you need to figure out how you're going to communicate. Now, sometimes you can hear this called, or you'll hear this called a project communication plan. And I think when people hear that, it's like you feel like the tendency is you got to come up with this like really long, elaborate, like multi-page, with lots of charts and graphs and stuff, communication plan. And that's not necessary. It's really not. But I do like the idea of a communication plan, but it doesn't have to be this like great big thing. It can just be like a few paragraphs that kind of explains at the beginning of a project, hey, this is the basic plan, okay? And what would you cover in that communication plan? Well, you would cover the who, what, when, where, and why, which is what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so anyways, all that was the introduction to the who. So who are we going to communicate with on a project? Well, there's three main groups of people. The first is your leadership, the project. So this could be like the project's leadership or your department's leadership. Okay, so we know we have our project sponsor, and the project sponsor, again, is the person who authorized the work. That could be your boss. It could be someone in your fire department's leadership, whoever authorized the work. But then sometimes you have just people in your organization's leadership that need to know about the project. And it's really important to keep the project's leadership and your department's leadership informed about these projects, because they're going to get questions about this. They're the people that are ultimately going to have to continue to support this project, either with financial resources or with the public support that they give to your project. So you really want to make sure you keep these people informed and satisfied about what the project is doing, where we're at, and how things are going. Okay, next group, the project team. Now, your project team, as sort of the name would imply, is the group of people that you have put together for this particular project. Now, very briefly, when you put that group together, you had probably a good mix of operations and administrative people. Your operations people, you have a good mix of all the different shifts. So that's your A, B, C shift, because we don't want to have all A shift or all B shift people, and then on a shift day or whatever, everybody on the project is at work, and so nothing's going to get done. So we have our team, which is a good mix of different shifts, admin, operations people. We've got our cross-functional team, meaning we have a bunch of different types of skills on our team. And so that's our project team. And we need to make sure that we communicate regularly with our project team. And I mean, I think everybody sort of intuitively understands why, but we don't want people duplicating effort. We don't want people that are frustrated. They're trying to figure something out and they can't figure it out and they're in a silo and maybe somebody else on the team has the solution and they just don't know it. So those are the things we want to prevent. We also want to keep our team up to date on how our department's leadership feels about the project. Hey, they're really excited about this, or hey, we need to work a little bit harder on this. So that feedback that you're getting from our first group that we talked about, which is the project leadership or your department's leadership. Okay. Lastly, we have our stakeholders. Now, stakeholders, the sort of loose definition here is people who are affected by your project or have a vested interest in your project. So that's your stakeholders. So one more time, our three groups of people that we want to communicate with are leadership and project sponsor, our project team, and our stakeholders. Now, each of these groups is going to have different needs and expectations, but they're all going to rely on you to keep them informed. And that information is going to need to come in a consistent, easy to understand, readily accessible manner. And we'll talk about push and pull communication in a little bit, but in a way that they're going to be able to absorb that information. So not just 100 different emails back to back to back. Okay, let's now move into what are we communicating to these different groups. So we talked about who we're going to communicate to. Now, what are we going to communicate? So and to be clear, it's going to be a little bit different group by group by group. So let's start with leadership. Whenever you're communicating with your department's leadership or just any leadership, you want to bear in mind that they've got a lot of different things going on, and your project is just going to be one of those things. So you want to keep it brief and concise and like very, very relevant to them. So with that in mind, there are four main things that I'm going to want to communicate to leadership about a project. What's been completed. And so this is just like, hey, this has been this list of things are things that are done. We've done for this project. Okay. What's ongoing? So now with what's ongoing, what I really like to do is I'll list out like, 4, 5, 6 different activities that are going on right now. And then I will put an estimate of how much has been done. So I'll say 50% done, 60% done, 40% done, whatever. Now, obviously that estimate's going to be a little subjective, but so what I like to do is I like to ask the person who's in charge of that task to give me an update on how much of it is done. And I'll always get that update from that same person, so they're able to give me their perspective on how much of the work has been done. Now, not, mathematically exact, like it's exactly 50%, but it's close enough. And the intent is to give whoever's reading this update a basic understanding. Is this most of the way done, a little bit done, whatever, just a framework to understand it through. Okay, any risks, issues, or bottlenecks? This is really important. I've talked a little bit about risk throughout this podcast, and we certainly will a lot more. But if there are things that are threats to your project or bottlenecks, and by bottlenecks, it's like some reason or another that work has stopped. Like we need to set up this software, but we can't do it because the software hasn't arrived yet. Okay, well, that's a great bottleneck. That's a reason that a lot of activities are trapped and can't move forward. So things to think about and sort of things to raise awareness about, because there could be something that your project's leadership can do something. There are situations where they can do something about that, where you can say, hey, listen, this issue is holding us up. Can you help? And so maybe they can. So bring those issues to them, but at the very least, bring it up so they have an awareness. Hey, something has happened that is slowing work down. And then the last thing is, and we talked about this a little bit, is resources that you need, which could just be help. But resources could also be, I need more money, I need more people on the project, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you need from them? So 4 things we're going to put on that update are what's been completed, what's ongoing, risks, issues, and bottlenecks, and resources needed. So now this is true for all the categories, but just remember, communication is a two-way street. So you're not just telling your leadership like, hey, this, and this, and this. You are telling them stuff, but you're also getting feedback back from them. Like, hey, this is the thing we just finished. What do you think about this? Do you like it? Are we over the target here? So get that feedback, and you're going to want to bring that to your project team, which is a good segue to your project team. What do we want to communicate to our project's team? Now, the project team, there is a risk of over communicating here. And what I mean by that is, and really there's a risk of over communicating with everybody. And by over communicating, what I mean is just giving people more information than they need or too many details, like non-actionable details. This doesn't mean that you hoard information or anything like that. It just means just because there's something happening on a project doesn't necessarily mean everybody needs to know about it. So just use your good judgment there. But with your project team, what you want to basically strive for is everybody has an understanding of what everybody else is working on and a shared understanding of the project's risks and goals. And so when you have these, whether it's, when you have your team meetings or whatever other medium you're using to communicate with your team, you want to make sure you're striving for those things. Do people have a good understanding of what other people are working on? And do we have a shared understanding of our project's risks? And so that also includes bringing the feedback that you've gotten from your leadership to your project team so that they can be in the loop, because you are likely going to be the only person on that project team that's communicating with them regularly, that's sitting in those meetings. So it's really important that you be a good messenger for that information to your project team. Okay. Lastly, let's talk about stakeholders. Now, what do stakeholders need to know? What do they want to know? Well, let's remember that a stakeholder is someone who has vested interest in your project. So because they have a vested interest in your project, they probably want to know how it's going. They want to know, are we on track? And they want to know, what do you need from them? Now, with stakeholders, what I like to do is, with stakeholders and for your leadership, I like to have that be the same communication. And the reason for that is just simply it's easier for you as a project manager if you only have one update. And that's your update that you give to your leadership and to your stakeholders and also to your team. So I'll create one single page update, and it'll have all of those different elements that we talked about: what's ongoing, what's been done, what's at risk, and what do I need. And I will distribute that to everybody: stakeholders, leadership, and the project team. And the reason for that is, first of all, it's just easier because it's one communication that everybody gets. You only have to make one of them. But also, it ensures that there's a consistent message going out. Everybody's aware of what's going on. Everybody's aware of the risks, et cetera, et cetera. So one consistent communication to go out to everybody can save you a little bit of time and also ensure that you have a consistent message going out. Okay, let's move into when, which is basically just how often do you need to communicate. So this is a good segue into the project's tempo, because the tempo really is the decision point on how often you're going to communicate. But it's more than that. The tempo is, how often are you going to meet? How often are you going to communicate? How often are you going to send out these updates? How often are you going to check in with your team? So it's basically just, what speed or rhythm is this project going to have? And communication is certainly a key element of that. So what kinds of things will dictate the tempo of your communication? Well, first off is just the overall duration of the project. So if you have a long-term project, like a 2, 3, 4-year project, whatever, there's going to be a lot less communication, probably a lot less communication than if you had a 90-day project. 90-day project, obviously that deadline is coming up. It's going to start impacting people sooner. And so for that reason, more communication is necessary. But you also have projects that have a lot more visibility or decision points or organizational risk associated with them. And for those kinds of projects, you're going to need more frequent, more deliberate communication. So an example of that is the pharmacy project that we did last year. So this was just like a crazy complicated project that we had, where we had a really short time frame to open a fully functioning fire department pharmacy. And, kind of the backstory on that was there'd been a ton of discussion and confusion at the state, local, and federal level about a bunch of regulations that were changing, which impacted the way medications were stored and delivered and dispensed throughout the whole state of Virginia, which necessitated us standing up our own pharmacy, which supplied 23 fire stations, 650 sworn members, and so a large operation. It also had to have a tracking and tracing software. It had to have a packaging solution, like how are you going to package and store these medications. We had to develop a supply chain, a resilient supply chain, a distribution network. Like how do we get these medications from our central hub to all the different fire stations, ambulances, and fire trucks? So, and I could go on and on, but the point I'm trying to make here is that it was a really complex, highly visible project with lots and lots of decision points. Like, hey, where are we going to put these storage lockers? How are we going to distribute it from this point to this point? How is this thing going to happen? And so those are all decision points. And the visibility just means people in your organization are aware of it, they see it, and they have questions about it. So for this project, we had a lot of different forms of communication. And so this is, kind of going back to that touch points, which I promise we will talk about, but basically just different locations where people are getting that information from. So this was our weekly department newsletter. This was various different gatherings, like our officer in service, where you have all of our officers in one room. So a bunch of different ways we were communicating out about this. And so back to the when, in this particular project, it was a lot more frequent than it probably would have been. But because of the high visibility, because of the organizational risk that we faced, we felt that we needed to communicate more frequently. So just, these are all things to keep in mind when you're figuring out the tempo of your communication. But just remember that it's much better to err on the side of more communication rather than less. And, just generally it contributes to an overall feeling of transparency. And also it's better for people to be more informed than less informed. But there is such a thing as too much communication, overwhelming people with those details or oversaturating the communication landscape, as it's sometimes referred to. So just something to think about. But again, err on the side of more communication rather than less. Okay, let's talk about where do you communicate. So what I mean by that is, what tools and platforms are we going to use to communicate? Now, there are a ton. There's a ton. You can use phone, you can text, you can call, you can email, you can use Microsoft Teams, you can have in-person meetings, you can have hallway meetings, whatever. There's so many different ways that you can communicate, places where that information can be, or platforms that it can go across. And they all have their individual pros and cons. And, I'm not going to go through all of them here. I think you largely know them all. Kind of the pros and cons of text versus a phone call versus email or whatever. But what I would say is, whatever you choose, wherever your communication is going to come from, whatever platform, you just want to be consistent and you want to make sure everybody knows what to expect. And this is where the communication plan can be really valuable. So you're basically just saying, hey, listen, guys, our primary method of communication is going to be email, and our backup is going to be text. And for file storage, we're going to be using a shared folder or Microsoft Teams or whatever. So just making sure that everybody has a consistent understanding of where to go for communication, which seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how often on a project somebody will say, hey, did you see that Teams message I sent you? No, sorry, I missed it. Okay, well, I'll just send it to you again as an email. That's just wasted time. It's frustration, and it increases the likelihood that you're going to miss something, or your project team is going to miss something important. So the point I'm making here, guys, is it doesn't really matter where you communicate, just as long as you have a shared understanding of where you're going to communicate. And one more thing I'm going to say here, and I talk about this a lot, but I just think it's a really valuable tool, is utilizing shared documents. Shared documents in the fire department, like I'm talking about using like Microsoft Office or Microsoft Word rather, are just so valuable because it allows you to collect information across time and space. So it doesn't have to be by time and space. I mean, it doesn't have to be collected right this very second, and it can be anywhere, wherever the people you need to collect that information are, as long as they have access to Microsoft Word. And I like to use shared documents for a lot of things. You can collect requirements that way. You can collect risks that way. Just a great way to sort of crowdsource information, crowdsource that collecting of information. And it's also a great way for you to work on documents together. Very often on a project, you'll have to write a new SOG or a new policy or something. And so you a lot of times you're going to want to work on that as a group. And so shared documents are a great way to do that. So, okay, that's where we're going to communicate. Oh, hang on. A couple more things I want to talk about here. All right, push and pull communication. So really interesting concept that I learned about a few years ago. And basically what we want to think about with this is, when we put information out there, we want to be mindful that there are times when people are going to be looking for information. So that's when they might go to kind of like a dashboard and they might try to pull that information to them. So that's when they want the information. And then there's going to be times when we just want to give it to them. That's like when we send out an email to everybody, whether they're on vacation or at work or whatever. So we're pushing that email out to people. So again, pull communication is when they want that information, they go seek it out and they pull it to them, versus push, which is when we just want them to have that information and we push it out to them. Now, pros and cons to both, but the point is, be mindful of which kind you're using and try to mix it up so that you have both push and pull communication. Sending out those push emails, but you also have a SharePoint page or a dashboard that people can go to pull that information when they want it. So having both, which is a good segue into touch points. Now, touch points are basically just a fancy way of saying all the different ways that communication gets out there. So to give you an example of having multiple touch points, if I wanted to communicate about my project, I might send out a department-wide email. I would also put it in our weekly newsletter, talk about it on our weekly podcast, and maybe send out, I don't know, some other message about it. And so what I'm giving you the example of here is having multiple different touch points or ways that that information can get out. And putting it out across multiple different mediums like this or multiple different touch points like this just gives you it casts a broader net, and it makes it more likely, A, that people are going to see the message, but B, it makes it more likely that they're going to internalize it because they're getting it from a bunch of different sources now. So, we don't need to go on and on about that, but be mindful about these kinds of things because it's not just enough to get that communication out there. You want it to be effective communication, which means you need people to see it and internalize it. Okay, last, let's jump into why communication matters. Now, this one's kind of intuitive. We all know that communication is important. And, we also know that on pretty much every NIOSH report, communication is listed as one of the contributing factors to firefighter injuries and fatalities. So we know, as firefighters, we know communication is critical. But let's delve into a couple of the specifics on why. So firstly, it's going to prevent duplication of effort or rework, as they call it in the project management world. And so, this is, I don't need to go on and on and explain this to you guys. You know what I mean by duplication of effort. You don't want people on your project teams doing the same work. You just don't. It's a waste of time, waste of energy, waste of effort. So prevents duplication of effort. It's good for building trust and morale. And so, this is something that we miss on projects a lot. I think because firefighters cut their teeth going to emergencies or whatever, we just have this natural belief that, well, projects might be hard, but they're never going to be as hard as going to a fire or a gunshot or whatever. And that's true. But projects have their own stress associated with them. They have their own morale issues. Project teams suffer from high and low morale. I don't suffer from high morale, but you know what I mean. You can have low morale on a project team just like you can in a workforce. And so it's important to have good communication throughout your project team so that you don't lose focus and critically, you don't lose momentum. Communication is the key to keeping momentum going, or it's one of the keys to keeping momentum going. You got good workflow, people are getting stuff done, you're cooking. This is great because now you can say, hey, guys, this is what we've accomplished in the last week, or this is what we've accomplished in the last month, or whatever. That communication gets everybody on the same page, but it also gets people excited. They can see the progress. They can see something tangible there. So great for keeping up good morale, great for keeping good project momentum. But lastly, I should say, it keeps your leadership engaged. And so on our first episode, we talked about how having poor leadership buy-in or having your leadership be disinterested in a project can be a thing that can contribute to the failure of a project. And so the inverse of that is good communication keeps your project's leadership engaged and supportive of your project, which contributes to the overall success of it. All right, so we have a little bit of time here at the end, so I'm just going to talk briefly about project meetings and how I like to structure them and how I have found the best way to communicate in those meetings is. And I think this is important because this is a skill that we don't talk much about in the fire service. I mean, we do like, communication and presentation stuff, but running a team meeting can be challenging. It can be stressful. So some things you can do to help the meeting go better and also just to take some of that stress off of you is plan it out. Planned communication is good communication. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have a script and you got to read off the script or whatever, but just think through what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and what are the key points you want your audience to take away, your team to take away. So think about the communication, plan it out ahead of time. Like think about what that meeting is going to look like. And just, it's not going to be exactly like you picture it in your mind, but just think it through a little bit. Also, come up with a meeting agenda. So, when we avoid doing this, I think sometimes because it can feel very sort of rigid or formal or whatever. But the reality is, you want to be respectful of people's time, and an agenda can help you stick to specific time of the meeting. But also, importantly, it makes sure that you cover everything you need to cover, so you aren't sending that email at the end of the meeting. Hey, I forgot about this, forgot about that. So get an agenda to make sure that you stay on track and also that you hit the main points you want to talk about. Now, another great pro tip that I've found for project meetings is you have to assign owners of the work. So a lot of times in the course of a project meeting, you'll say, okay, this is how this thing's going, and now we need to start working on this, and you'll kind of come up with that plan, like, okay, great, can you help with that? And maybe I'll get you to help with that as well. And so you come up with the plan kind of in that meeting. So make sure that you recap with some ownership here and say, okay, so guys, this is what we're going to do on for the next week, and Chris is going to take point on that. Assigning that owner, we talked about this a lot on the last episode, is a great way to just make sure that you have that added accountability for that work. And then maybe you'll even assign that deadline. And I like, as you guys know, I like to ask people who are doing the work, hey, how long do you think you need to get that done? A week? Okay, great. A week it is. So now I have an owner for that work and I have a deadline for that work. And then for the project meeting, keep track of that. It's going to be very easy to lose track of all the things that you've discussed in that meeting. So as that project manager, take notes on these things and just say, this work was assigned to this person with this deadline. Take those, just, scribble those notes down. And then at the end of the meeting, take those notes and well, let me finish my thought and then I'll give you a little pro tip. But at the end of the meeting, take those notes and just put it all together into a meeting summary and to send out to everybody. Now, pro tip, there's a ton of different software solutions for this. If you have Microsoft Teams and you run a meeting in Teams, it can automatically transcribe that for you. So you have your Teams meeting, you record the meeting. At the end of the meeting, go back and hit the transcription button, and it'll, I can't remember where it is, but very prominently displayed is a button that says transcribe, and it'll give you the full transcription of that meeting. So you can either, throw that into ChatGPT and say, hey, give me the, meeting summary or meeting highlights, or you can do it yourself, or you can just send it as is to everyone to take a look at. But just a great way of capturing like the highlights of the meeting, the action items, and sending those out to everybody. So these are just a couple thoughts I have on just how to run a good project meeting. And the last thing I'm going to say is, I know it's hard, but if it's your meeting, run that meeting. Stand in the front of the room, address everybody. Take a deep breath before you go in. Have some good confidence, have a good bearing, and then run the meeting. And people resonate with that. People know that public speaking is hard. People know that running meetings is hard intuitively. And so have the confidence to run it the right way. And I think you'll find that your project team and your stakeholders will be very supportive of that. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening to Project Command. If you found today's episode helpful, please remember to share it with somebody in your department or on your next project team. Remember that every share helps more fire service professionals learn the tools and mindset to deliver stronger, smarter projects. And also, if you have questions, topic ideas, or challenges you'd like us to talk about, email us at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it either directly or on a future episode. I'm Captain Peter Eunice, and this has been Project Command, bringing command level thinking to every project in the fire service.